That's how we end up with situations where every group dislikes every other group of people in a company, where everybody thinks that everything they're using is useless. It needs to be business. Business not necessarily is earning money, but business in terms of relation with your customers.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 154, Reducing Developer Friction. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Recently we had on Diago and Ragnar about how they're building out their internal developer platform at Pipedrive. And Victor has done a video about the purposes of internal developer platforms. And we figured all of this really boils down to is, in theory, reducing developer friction.
Exactly. So I would say actually enabling developers to do stuff, to be self-sufficient, which in turn requires removing the friction.
But in a lot of places, they're going to say, well, we're too busy being busy right now, and we don't have time to implement something to make friction go away. How do we help people think that through a little more sanely?
To begin with, I believe that every company I've been in contact with for years now is building an internal developer platform or internal platform or something like that.
Whether they know it or not, or intentionally?
Whether they know it or not. If they create shared libraries in Jenkins, they're building a platform. If somebody else, somebody that is not owning an application, creates a Helm chart that others are using, they're creating a platform, right? It might be a very early stages. It might not be going in a right direction. It might be many, many different things. But if you're doing something that is eventually used by others, consumed by others, then you are creating an internal platform. The bigger question to me is not that much whether companies are doing that already or no, but more, do they really understand the purposes or the real goals of such platforms? And whether what they're doing is really benefiting developers, whether they're going into the right direction, and so on and so forth.
What should be the purpose or a goal of a platform?
The purpose should be to enable developers to perform types of operations that typically they might not be able to do, or they might be required to request from others to do for them, and so on and so forth. So being able to do things that traditionally they're not able to do that. Whether that's deploying an application, creating a cluster, managing a cluster, observing the state of something, of an application in production, or anything else in between. So that's the goal. Where I think that many are failing is not understanding that cannot be rigid. It cannot be inflexible, right? You cannot just say, I created this Helm chart, you have to use it as is. I did this, you have to use it as is. Because then we are getting into the situations, hey, this is not really meeting my needs. Or this is not meeting my needs and it will require you another 3 months to make a small modification so that does fit my needs. So it's really complicated, I believe, to find that balance between providing something as a service that, on one hand, hides the complexities of the things that others do not care about, but not hiding it completely, still giving freedom for developers to be able to define things themselves. Like, hey, I can write manifests of my applications myself. Hey, I can exercise certain control on my pipelines. I can write them myself with helpers, right? Everything with helpers. So I'm not saying everything from scratch, but being able to consume those platforms in a similar way as operation departments are consuming AWS, let's say, right? AWS is not going to the stream that says, click this button and you will get a VM and you cannot decide anything. You cannot decide the size of the VMs. You cannot decide which VPC it will run in, and so on and so forth. So AWS is giving you a lot of options to choose from, and those options are, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, everything that operators need, but not more. There's a lot of complexity hidden from operators in AWS services, but not everything is hidden, right? You still have control. And that's that balance that is very, very hard to establish. What is it that people don't care about? And what are the things that are important to them?
Well, you were talking about items that are as is. I think when you're starting out, you have to start with as is. Because if you try to give enough switches and knobs for people to throw or entry points for them to extend, that might hold up getting something out to begin with.
Not necessarily. So think of it as being a business. Let's say that creating and selling, not literally selling, but selling a platform to everybody else, that's a business of a group of people. Think of it that way, and they're free to use it. They're free not to use it, just like in really business. Wouldn't you start with, hey, what are the needs of those people? And how about, instead of not having all those options, doors, and knobs, which I agree you cannot do from the get-go, how about we actually have a very small service instead that will indeed fulfill the needs of those people? Imagine that business is Amazon.com, and you say, I'm going to start very simple. I'm not going to give people too many options. And among other things, they will not have an option to define their shipping address. We cannot start with that. It's too complex. How many would use Amazon in that case, right? There are certain requirements. There are certain minimum requirements, MVP, that you need to do. If that MVP, if that scope is too big, then maybe reduce the scope, not reduce the options within the scope of what you're doing. In any case, the first step is not what you said. The first step is like with any product, with any business. Hey, what do my users need? Discovery. That's the first step.
What if the beliefs of the users are so wide-ranging? Let's say for a moment that I'm talking to, and let's focus on application developers. Some people want to use Windows, some people want to use Linux, some people want to use Mac. Even within each of those, some people within Windows want to use server versions versus 10 versus 11. On Mac, they want to use the last 3 versions. On Linux, they want to use 18 different versions. They want to use VS Code. They want to use Eclipse. They want to use JetBrains. They want to use VI. They want to use Emacs. You cannot tell me that providing a service out of the box for those people to begin with, to cover every one of those things, is going to happen day one. That's insane.
Not. Of course not. You need to find the subset of all the potential users and the subset of their needs that you want to satisfy. Think of it as business, right? Let's say that this is not an internal team, and the scenario that you just explained, it's a business. And of course, you cannot cover all the users in the world from the get-go, from day one. Later on, if you grow to be Amazon, then maybe, but not from day one. How would you answer your own question if that would be business?
Well, I would give them 2 options. You can use Eclipse, you can use VS Code.
Yeah, that could be
and that's it. I mean, because that's all I can do to get something out the door and supportable in the next month or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, fair enough. So the point is always in business, right? What are the users you can satisfy? What is it that you can give them? And that's a subset of users. It's always a subset of users, right? Of potential customers of your business, whatever the business is. Forget about platform, right? When I sometimes review products and I speak with companies that are working on those projects, one of the first things I always ask them when they're just starting, hey, what is your target user? Is it small company, medium company, big company? If you tell me all three of them in your tiny startup, and I'm talking about software vendor startups, right? If they say all, my answer is you're going to fail. There is no point speaking with you, right? You cannot have everybody as a starting point ever. That never works. So you need to figure out what is the 2%, 1%, 10%, whatever of users that I want to satisfy with this something, whatever that something is. And that something also cannot be huge, right? It must be small. That's how we start businesses. And if you apply the same logic to internal platform, actually, that's I asked it as a question. If we no, when we apply the same logic, we can be successful because, hey, I would be much happier having 10 people happy than having 1,000 people unhappy.
Why do you say that?
Because I know that I cannot satisfy 1,000 people from the get-go. Because, you cannot do everything in first week, month, year, whatever the time frame is. I cannot satisfy everybody. I cannot help everybody. But I can figure out what is the biggest impact I can make for my business. I'm still treating it as business to a biggest subset of users, or maybe smaller subset of users with bigger scope, or whatever the business is, right? I need to figure out who my customers are. And I think that that's the key when talking about internal platforms. We cannot be guessing what people need. We cannot treat those people as they're not our customers. I'm doing something, and then my CTO is going to make sure that everybody's forced to use that something. That's a recipe for disaster. That's how we end up with situations where every group dislikes every other group of people in a company, where everybody thinks that everything they're using is useless. It needs to be business. Business not necessarily as earning money, but business in terms of relation with your customers. Find 5 developers for all I care. Find one group, one team. That's enough to start with, and see how you can help them on 5% of their application lifecycle. Doesn't have to be even 100.
So let's get tactical with this. We've picked our one team. Where do we start? I have an opinion based on something that just recently happened to me.
So there are 2 good starting points, I believe. First, or you can choose one of the 2 I'm going to say. First, what are the things that exercise or require a lot of your involvement and you're not happy doing it? On which task you spend most of your time, excluding writing code? Java, JavaScript, Python, Go, whatever you're writing, the application itself. If I can remove one of those pain points, I could be successful, right? They could be happy with my product, new service. And the other thing is, what are the things that team today requests of me and I spend most time with? So they might not actually be wasting their time because they open Jira tickets like crazy. Like, I need a new application. I need this application deployed. And I need actually deploy it again. And you still didn't deploy it the first time. And so on and so forth, right? So if the communication right now is through Jira tickets actually, figuratively speaking, it could be GitHub issues or anything else, that's something I can remove. And that might be even better because I would fix 2 problems in that case. One problem is the developers are very unhappy that they have to open issues. Takes them just as much time to open an issue as to do it themselves, if actually they would have means to do it, because it's filling in some fields in Jira, right? And so they're not really saving time themselves while doing that, and their time while waiting until that something happens. Because at the other end of the equation, somebody needs to create that cluster, somebody needs to deploy that application, and that somebody is doing it manually, right? If I'm that somebody, I can reduce my time on that or working on that by giving service for that's one thing, one out of 1,000 things that I'm doing to developers, and I would have less work to do myself, meaning I could dedicate more time on that platform. And developers would be happy because they would be able to do things and they wouldn't need to wait for me to do it for them without really spending more time than creating Jira tickets.
So my recent pain was my primary machine corrupted and the backup was corrupted. And I had to do a fresh install of the OS. Based on what Victor is saying, I'm shifting left even further. In a lot of organizations, you're not allowed to install anything on your machine. You have to go through some sort of catalog to install the tooling, or at least you hope you can just use a catalog to install the tooling that you need. That's a reasonable version of self-service. That's a good platform item. But in my case, I'm allowed to do anything, right? I don't have those kinds of restrictions. So I'm sitting here writing down the notes of, okay, when this happens again the next time, or when I'm actually ready to upgrade to the next OS version, whenever that may be, next time I've got a plan, in theory, that I'm going to execute to refresh my machine. But really, should I be refreshing my machine as an application developer, or should I have other options to me today in 2022 instead of making sure, okay, do I have the right version of this? Do I have this and that and the other?
Somebody could give you means to actually restore your machine with, let's say, all the applications that most of the people use in your company and you as well. And might have saved you from that, right? That's why we have traditional IT departments. You remember from when we were working in offices, big companies, you would typically take that machine to some office somewhere, to some room, leave it there for a day or two or a week, and they would actually either restore some backup or reinstall operating system, do whatever needs to be done, right? Typically, you would give your machine to somebody and you would get it back a while later with hopefully with things you might need or part of the things, or maybe just it would be operational again and then you would install the rest. So what I'm saying is the problem in that story, in that combination of you giving the machine, is that you would be locked for a couple of days without machine, mostly because when you deliver that machine, you're not first in line. They have other machines to fix or reinstall or whatever they're doing, right? So you would be without machine. Now, if they would give you an option to do that yourself, then you would not have to wait, because restoring a machine really through some backups or ghosting or this or that doesn't take more than an hour. I'm inventing now. Maybe more than an hour. Doesn't matter.
A couple hours, maybe. Depends.
A couple of hours, but doesn't take days. The problem with waiting there, why it would take so long, so much, is because they're doing it for you, and there are other people that are ahead of you, right? Kind of like waiting in a queue to get coffee at Starbucks.
Do you just come in and say, I'm special? Or is it because you've gone ahead and placed the mobile order and you just walk up to the mobile order counter, pick up your order, and walk out?
Exactly. Maybe you ordered online and then you skip the queue. Or maybe you ordered online and it will be delivered to you, right? But there are definitely ways how to empower people to do things themselves. A good example, actually, I'm not sure whether that is happening in Starbucks, right? But if you go to McDonald's, at least here, you can go to the counter like always, ask for your whatever you want to eat there and wait. Or you can skip the line and there are kind of touch screens that are usually empty because there are much more screens to order stuff than employees at the counter. And by ordering verbally yourself, you're actually speeding up the process in case of McDonald's, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is still true here as well, even though I just use the mobile app instead of the kiosk inside of the store. I still don't go into stores yet. But let's go back to my question again. Should application developers really be doing everything on their local machines today? We're talking about reducing friction.
if I don't have a dependency on a specific piece of hardware.
Oh, you're now asking about remote environments, right?
Sort of remote environments. And I'm not saying remote necessarily as cloud, but remote just not on my machine. I mean, we've had this for decades now with, what were those things called? Basically, all you had was a little terminal. Well, literally, you had terminals years ago. But then you've had these desktop devices, I don't remember the actual name of them, that was basically going back and giving you compute. Is that something that we really should be looking at today?
I think we should. And I have a feeling that very often we look at those types of environments very much from developer perspective, at least me in the past, and missing actually the equally big advantage or even bigger advantage of such environments. And that's from operational perspective, right? If I'm tasked to help people in creating developer environments, whatever those environments are, the first thing I would probably start looking at is how can I move them to remote environments and give them the same benefits as they're having locally, because if I do that, I am able to create a service, or at least easier way to create a service, right? It's so much easier for me to manage one way or another 1,000 dev environments in a cluster than 1,000 dev environments in 1,000 laptops. If I do that without giving even a single benefit to devs, but not making it worse, I'm still getting a lot of benefits, right? If I could provide just the same amount of flexibility and utility and likeness of such environments remotely as locally, is still good. They're not happier, but they're not less happy either. My users, my customers. But I myself just freed my time to do something else because I made my job easier. So it's always that either you're providing additional value to somebody, or you're improving your own workflow so that you can do more. Maybe you would have, instead of 1 hour a week, 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week free to work on something else that would provide even greater value.
The way I look at it too, you're probably not going to be saving any money. In fact, you might be paying a little bit more money, or maybe a lot more money, but you're not having to buy 32, 64 gig of RAM machines to give to people. You can get by probably with the 16 to 32. Let's be fair, right? Still give good power to your developers. But I think about the pluses of being able to connect to that, whatever that remote environment is. I'm going to have better pipes between my SCM and that development environment. All the networking stuff that happens when you're on a laptop, it doesn't disappear, but it changes dramatically with it staying reasonably co-located.
Also think about the future as well, like upgrades, future improvements. Like, why did many companies switch to provide their software as a web app instead of desktop app? Is it necessarily because web apps are better than desktop? No, they're not. But how much they save by not actually having to think about how do we actually provide upgrades to everybody instead of just upgrading our web app.
How do we fix the security issues? How do we let those people know? And we notified somebody that, okay, this version of our app, you need to upgrade to this version and you need to get it done now. Well, I'm sorry, exactly. As your customer, I don't have the time to do that. I've got other things on my list.
Exactly. And that sort of centralization in that example of, web app versus desktop app, how much it simplifies operations. I think that that's one of the very valid and important arguments for remote environments. I can make sure that everybody's, let's say that remote environment, development environment is Kubernetes, right? And let's say that right now it's 121 because that's our production. We want to have it as close to production as possible. How do I upgrade everybody to 122? Either everybody needs to upgrade themselves, Or maybe I just have it centralized as a service somewhere. Namespaces in a cluster or whatever, vCluster, whatever technology we're using. I just upgrade that service and all of a sudden, everybody has it.
And that seems like a great friction reducer because a change is made that is documented based on it being code. If it is fine, you keep on moving forward, happy. If it goes sideways, you know this change went in. So that could have been the root cause, or that could have been a contributing factor that caused the root cause. I think it's something that's important to understand too, is just because a change occurred doesn't mean that's what caused the problem. It just happened to reveal the problem. It could be the problem, but it was the leading cause for the problem. So what we want to do is we want to be able to reduce the friction that our application developers and our SREs and our fill-in-the-blank people do. Heck, I even want to say that we want to reduce the friction that our finance people need to deal with and our HR people need to deal with. So if we're tasked, whether we're the traditional IT people or we're SREs providing services for whatever stack it is that we're trying to do, think about treating those people as this is my business. And I might deal with HR a little bit differently than I deal with application developers versus finance. But to me, those would be just 3 variations of the same product. The base product could still be there, but then I dress it up a little bit differently for each of those 3 user groups.
Sometimes not. Sometimes you can say, hey, I cannot satisfy both HR and
Right.
front end. So at least not today, maybe tomorrow.
Not today,
So
but
that's okay.
in finding, so that's what I'm saying is going back to our as is at the beginning, get something out there that you think is going to work. That is your initial as is. And then you start figuring out, okay, and my as is, the way I'm saying it, is either alpha or somewhere between alpha and beta. It's not productized yet. I'm still kicking the tires. This is the stealth mode, if you will, even though probably everybody knows what's going on. And then once you've had it out there and running and you finally find a V1, now you're serving that one group really well. This is where Slack came out of, right? Slack was initially inside of a gaming platform, but the gaming platform was useless compared to Slack. Well, not useless, but the real value in what was going on was Slack, not the gaming platform.
I thought that was Discord. Or maybe
Slack.
both. Okay.
Yeah. It could be Discord. Well, Discord is still used in gaming, but yes. But no, Slack came out of a gaming system.
Yeah.
So don't necessarily start out by trying to create the perfect thing. Create the thing. And then as it's being used, you're going to see what the thing finally is. That could be that core, that seed that gets you on to the next thing for whatever your organization needs.
The important message here is to avoid at any cost forcing your customers to use your services, which unfortunately is what most companies I'm in contact with are doing. It's perfectly okay if somebody wants direct access to your Kubernetes cluster, including AWS account to create a Kubernetes cluster. That's perfectly fine, because if they do access it directly instead of using your service, that's a very clear message that they do not see value in your service. And you will never get that message if people are simply forced to use it. If they're forced, then there is no alternative. There must be an alternative so that you can do the job better.
Well, this is probably where you and I disagree. I don't think there's any problem in forcing people to use your platform. And if they don't want to use your platform just because they don't want to, and they want to do it themselves because they know better than everybody else, that's a problem. And as an organizational owner, I can't allow, as an exec or a C-level, I cannot allow that because of compliance and regulations. I can't let people just go and do what they want to do.
No, just to clarify, I'm not suggesting that in any form of way. You do need to have compliance and regulations and stuff like that. So those are the requirements of your business. But whether somebody is going to accomplish that compliance, let's say, through an internal service or without that internal service, is not a requirement. Requirement is to accomplish it. And no sane person wants extra work. Nobody wants to set up Kubernetes clusters instead of writing their, code front-end application, something. Or if somebody wants it, they don't have time for it. And if they do that, that means that actually that might be faster for them than using your service. But that does not exclude the requirements. If requirements is that you cannot have, you cannot have ports open, And you need to prove it if you're doing it yourself. And nobody will do it themselves unless they have a good reason. And you need to find out what that reason is.
And a lot of times it may just be a misunderstanding.
Could be.
They just don't understand. It's like, well, I'm new to Kubernetes, so I just want to set it up. And, I read something about node port from something that was published in 2017.
Exactly. It's like if you go back to the example of McDonald's kiosks, some people might not be using those kiosks, even though they're more convenient, because they're of misunderstanding, as you say, because they're not aware. It's actually, I did not know that actually that's how I can skip waiting in a queue. Maybe all that is needed is marketing. Again, it's your product, it's your business. There must be a reason that people are not using something. Maybe that something is not good. Excellent. Then you need to fix it. Maybe they're not aware of it. Maybe they did not get enough training on it, right? You need to figure out what the reason is that somebody does not want to use your business or be your customer. You need to figure it out. Like in a real business, right? You cannot just, if it would be a real business, you cannot force people and say, you need to buy everything through my shopping platform. You cannot use Amazon. No. You need to figure out how you can be better than Amazon.
Treat it like a business.
Exactly.
If you're incapable of treating what you're doing as a business, then you just need to move on because it's going to fail. Let
me slightly correct what you said. Treat it as an, what's the expression? Free market business, not as a monopoly business.
Interesting thought. And this is going to lead us into our next episode where we're going to talk about how to tell if what you have is actually a project or if it's a product.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.